What has to happen for ocean water to end up coming out of the faucet in the middle of the desert? In Saudi Arabia, millions of people depend on a giant network of pipes, desalination plants, and pumping systems that work tirelessly to transform salty water into drinking water. In this video, we will delve into that invisible infrastructure that crosses the country and turns the sea into the main source of life in one of the driest regions of the world. Saudi Arabia has over 37 million inhabitants, and the vast majority of its population practices Islam. An important detail is that people are mainly concentrated along the coastal strips of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, while the interior of the country remains largely a desert with very little human presence. The country possesses one of the most coveted resources in the world, oil. But that privilege doesn't solve everything. Even with vast reserves underground, Saudi Arabia must invest huge sums to obtain something much harder to find there: fresh water. Annual rainfall is usually below 100 millimeters, and in summer, temperatures frequently exceed 45 degrees Celsius. To live and thrive in this environment, the country developed a national water delivery system through pipelines. The network is built with high-strength carbon steel, similar to that used in oil and gas pipelines, and its cost can be around $3 million per kilometer, not counting pumping stations and desalination plants, which alone can cost tens of millions. Where does the water that drives this network come from? From an almost inexhaustible source, the sea. The problem is that seawater contains about 3.5% salt, too much to drink or irrigate crops. That's why desalination became the key component. It allows the transformation of salty water into usable water on a large scale. The pipes transport water from large desalination plants along the Red Sea. A single plant can convert around 7 million liters daily into potable water, though with a very high energy consumption. And to carry that flow inland, the pipes first have to be manufactured. They are made with carbon steel plates, designed to withstand constant pressure, shocks during installation, and the extreme temperature changes of the desert. The plates are cut to exact measurements and rolled into machines until they form tubes about 1.8 meters in diameter and walls about 25 millimeters thick. Then, longitudinal welding is done. The seam is cooled, edges are ground to remove burrs, and the ends are beveled to achieve firm and airtight joints. The sections are usually about 12 meters long to reduce the number of welds without complicating transportation. Afterward, the pipes are stored, marked in batches, and loaded onto specialized vehicles to be transported to the work sites. On the route, technical teams organize the pieces, perform final inspections, and define the path using GPS and topographic equipment, avoiding weak soils and areas with unstable sand. Once the route is marked, the land is cleared, leveled, and access roads are prepared so that heavy machinery can work without interruptions. With everything ready, crawler excavators begin to dig the trench following the alignment, with width and depth calculated to safely place and cover the pipes. The extracted soil is sorted on site. Suitable material is reserved for backfilling, and unsuitable material is removed. Maintaining a consistent depth and proper alignment is essential to avoid deformations or misalignments once the pipe is installed. Additionally, in certain sections that cross rugged mountainous terrain, explosives are used to carve trenches directly into solid rock. Controlled charges are placed and detonated in sequence to fracture the bedrock along the planned route. The resulting trench has the necessary depth and width to safely lay the pipe, even where mechanical excavation is not possible. This method allows construction to continue through extreme landscapes while keeping the pipe buried, protected, and structurally stable. After excavation, the pipe is not placed directly on the bottom of the trench. A layer of selected material, typically fine sand or screened soil, is evenly spread to form a support bed. This layer distributes loads evenly and reduces stress points. The base is leveled and lightly compacted to reach the required elevation. In loose and dry desert soils, this step is key to long-term stability. To construct large-diameter pipeline routes, a construction corridor about 40 meters wide is prepared in advance. This allows the entire process to proceed continuously at an average pace of about 1.5 kilometers per day. Pipe sections around 18 meters long are selected to reduce the number of field welds, though this increases the demands for lifting, transport, and alignment during installation. In the welding area, A hydraulic clamp is placed inside the joint and expanded with gripping pads that surround 360 degrees, keeping the two sections perfectly concentric and aligned before and during the first pass of welding. An automated operation is deployed, supported by a team of around 80 people and dozens of specialized machines, capable of completing up to 150 welds per day on 42-inch diameter pipes. When welding is completed, each joint is inspected with automated ultrasonic testing to confirm that no internal defects exist. Then, the joint coating team cleans the surface with abrasive sandblasting and applies a multi-component liquid epoxy coating, creating a durable, fully sealed protective layer before lowering the pipes into the trench and backfilling it. The assembled pipes are lowered into the trench using side cranes mounted on crawlers, vehicles specifically designed for constructing large diameter pipelines. Several side arms work in sequence along the line. Each one lifts a section of the pipe using padded slings and steel cables to protect the coating. The line is lifted evenly and kept suspended while the machines slowly advance through the trench. Precise coordination between operators is essential to prevent twisting, bending, or contact with the excavation walls. When everything is properly aligned, the pipe is gradually lowered, inch by inch, until it rests in the center of the trench on the prepared base. Throughout this process, surveyors continuously monitor the elevation, straightness, and natural curvature to ensure that no residual stress is introduced. This method allows for quick, controlled, and highly precise placement, ideal for long, straight routes over flat desert terrain. Once the pipe is in place, the trench is backfilled in several layers. The first layer consists of fine material to protect the coating. Then, the excavated soil is added. Each layer is mechanically compacted to achieve the required density and minimize future settlement. In the desert, where wind and temperature variations affect the soil structure, proper compaction is vital for the system's long-term life. The process at the plant begins by capturing seawater directly from the open ocean and bringing it inland, creating a stable and continuous supply of raw water for the desalination facility. Large intake lines are first placed offshore. Teams align each section and lower it into place with high-capacity cranes operating from barges or coastal platforms. As the pipe nears the shore, the segments are connected one after another, forming a continuous conduit designed to operate under constant hydraulic load. Precise alignment is crucial because even small deviations can affect long-term flow performance and efficiency. Once the installation is completed, the intake line is reinforced with support structures and firmly anchored to the seabed. Desalination begins when seawater enters through pipes leading to open intake grids. The water is drawn from several hundred meters offshore, where barriers and filters trap large floating debris and prevent marine life from entering. A 63-centimeter pipe can pump up to 15 million liters per day, more than 10,000 liters per minute. At the intake point, powerful pumps push the water into the plant, and with the water sometimes come unwelcome guests, jellyfish, crabs, and occasionally small fish. To prevent them from entering the system, a massive grid is installed that blocks anything larger than 4.5 millimeters in diameter. Next, the water passes through finer screens to remove the remaining large particles. Although the larger organisms have already been removed, the water still contains suspended sediments. To address this, a filtration process is used in tanks like these, where the water descends through layers of sand using gravity. The spaces between the sand grains are so small that the water can pass through, but the particles are trapped. The sand continuously moves in the opposite direction of the flow, and dirt adheres to its surface. After this stage, the water appears cleaner, but still contains countless microscopic particles. Anything larger than approximately a tenth of the thickness of a human hair is removed. Then large paddles stir the water, and the plant adds two chemicals: sodium hypochlorite, which acts as a disinfectant, and ferric chloride, which functions as a coagulant. The coagulant causes the fine sand and waste particles to bind into larger flocks that eventually settle at the bottom of the tank. Although most of the dirt has already been removed, the water is still not clean enough for the main desalination stage. After fine filtration, it enters the cartridge filtration system, the last barrier before reverse osmosis. In each housing, there are multiple cartridges made with layers of tightly compressed fiber, with pores between 1 and 5 microns. The water flows from the outside toward the center of each cartridge. Along the way, microscopic particles are trapped between the fibers, and clean water continues to flow through. When a cartridge becomes saturated, engineers remove and replace it to maintain system performance. Then the water reaches the most critical stage, separating the salt from the water. Salt is very difficult to remove because its ions are strongly attached to the water molecules via electrostatic attraction. To break that bond, very high pressures need to be applied. This is where reverse osmosis comes into play. The idea is simple. Apply a pressure higher than the natural osmotic pressure to force the water through an ultra-thin membrane while the salt and other impurities are retained. To generate that pressure, the plant uses high-powered centrifugal pumps. Each component of the system controls a specific stage, and the pressure gradually increases as the water passes through successive phases of compression. Upon leaving the final stage of the pump system, the pressure reaches around 60 bar, approximately 60 times atmospheric pressure. This is enough to separate water and salt at the molecular level. After the first round of reverse osmosis, the water is almost free of salt, but traces of ions and microminerals still remain, and they must be completely removed to meet certain drinking water standards. That is why the water goes through a second phase of reverse osmosis, where finer membranes eliminate the remaining salt and reduce conductivity to very low levels, leaving the water almost completely pure. Then its pH is adjusted to make it safe for human consumption, and minerals like calcium and magnesium are added to improve its taste and quality. Finally, the water is distributed through a network of pipes to the cities of Saudi Arabia, although its cost is very high, close to $5 per cubic meter, compared to a few cents in other countries.